Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're new here, I'm Anna.
And I'm Eric. And today we're exploring a topic that's reshaping the life sciences ecosystem faster than anyone expected: reshoring. More and more pharmaceutical, biotech, MedTech, and diagnostic companies are bringing production back to the United States. And the reasons go way beyond supply chain headaches.
That's right. It's not just about geography anymore. It's about regulatory confidence, quality control, operational stability, and yes, long term cost efficiency. And here's the part people still underestimate: reshoring is not just a reaction to disruption, it's becoming a deliberate strategy. Companies are proactively choosing to manufacture in the US because it positions them for stronger compliance, faster approvals, and more resilient growth.
And this is where Emma International comes in. Reshoring isn't something you can improvise. When you're relocating API production, sterile injectables, biologics, or device assembly, you're not just moving a facility, you're moving an entire regulatory and operational ecosystem with it.
Exactly. And the companies that get it right are the ones that plan early, integrate quality from day one, and build FDA aligned infrastructure before equipment even lands on the loading dock. That's why Emma International's reshoring service has become such a critical solution for life science manufacturers. It's end to end: strategic planning, engineering, quality, regulatory, facility readiness, validation, workforce support, everything.
So let's start with why reshoring is accelerating. First, supply chain fragility. Over the last few years, companies saw what happens when a single overseas supplier goes offline: production delays, raw material shortages, missed launches, and in some cases, complete shutdowns. When you're under FDA oversight, that kind of volatility becomes a compliance risk, not just a logistics problem.
Right. And then you layer in geopolitical tensions, export restrictions, and shipping delays, and the industry had a wake up call. If you can't guarantee supply consistency, you can't guarantee product quality. That's why regulatory agencies are openly encouraging stronger domestic manufacturing capabilities. It aligns with continuity planning, redundancy, and risk based quality management.
And let's be honest, the regulatory expectations are only getting more complex. Between 21 CFR Parts 210/211, Part 820, EUMDR, ISO 13485, and ICH guidance, companies need precision to stay compliant. When manufacturing is halfway around the world, oversight becomes exponentially harder.
That's why bringing production home strengthens compliance. US based sites allow for tighter control of raw materials, more rigorous supplier oversight, cleaner documentation trails, and immediate alignment with FDA expectations. And that's the foundation of Emma International's reshoring service, helping companies design a facility and a quality system that is FDA ready from day one.
One of the biggest misconceptions is that reshoring is just a real estate or construction project. It's not. It's a regulatory project. It's about feasibility assessments, risk modeling, supply chain rationalization, QMS strategy, and documentation architecture. Facility build-out is just one piece of a very complex puzzle.
That's why Emma's approach always starts with a strategic planning and feasibility assessment. Companies need to know: what's the regulatory impact? How will quality systems need to evolve? What are the cost differentials between domestic and overseas production? Which suppliers need to be replaced or requalified? And what's the right site layout for GMP efficiency and inspection readiness?
And for companies that decide to move forward, the next phase is site selection and facility readiness: clean room classification, HVAC zoning, contamination control strategies, URS/FRS development, equipment qualification plans, and tech transfer documentation. Emma handles the full path, from engineering oversight to commissioning, qualification, and validation.
One of our favorite examples is the pharmaceutical firm that relocated its API and sterile injectable fill finish operations from India to New Jersey. That wasn't just a facility move, that was a complete regulatory transformation. Emma built their validation strategy, supported the regulatory change control submissions, aligned the QMS with domestic expectations, and trained their entire workforce on FDA requirements. The result? FDA approval within 8 months.
That's what reshoring looks like when it's done correctly. Not rushed, not improvised, but engineered. And it's not just pharma. We've supported molecular diagnostics companies reshoring PCR reagent production, MedTech manufacturers relocating device assembly from Mexico, and biologics manufacturers shifting cell therapy processes to U.S. sites for tighter quality control.
And all of this matters because when production is domestic, the data integrity picture changes completely. You have real time oversight, direct communication between departments, on site teams who understand FDA expectations, and quality systems that evolve with the product.
And that's the theme of today's conversation. Reshoring isn't just a business decision, it's a compliance decision, it's a quality decision, it's a patient safety decision. And when you execute it with the right partner, it becomes a competitive advantage, not a cost burden.
Over the next segment, we're going to break down the biggest challenges companies face during reshoring, the regulatory landmines to avoid, and the engineering and workforce strategies that determine whether the move succeeds or stalls.
The moment companies decide to reshore, the first challenge they run into is complexity. Moving a manufacturing operation isn't like moving an office. It's relocating an entire GMP ecosystem. Every process, every piece of equipment, every quality record, every supplier relationship, everything has regulatory implications. That's why the planning phase is so critical, and it's where we see the biggest differences between successful and struggling reshoring projects.
One of the most underestimated areas is tech transfer. When production has been happening overseas for years, sometimes decades, process knowledge is buried across multiple sites, cultures, and documentation systems. Companies often discover gaps they didn't know existed until the transfer begins. That's why EMA International always starts with a detailed process mapping and documentation audit. You can't transfer what you don't fully understand.
Exactly. And tech transfer isn't just recreating the process, it's optimizing it for FDA expectations. A process that might have been acceptable in an overseas facility could require major upgrades to meet current U.S. regulatory standards. That's where things like cleaning validation, environmental monitoring plans, and data integrity controls come into focus. Reshoring forces companies to evaluate. Does our process meet today's regulatory bar, not the bar from 10 years ago?
And then there's the engineering side. Facility readiness is a massive undertaking. When EMA is brought in, we're looking at HVAC zoning, clean room classifications, airflow patterns, particulate control, aseptic design, and equipment qualification. If a company is producing sterile injectables or high sensitivity diagnostic reagents, the environmental requirements are incredibly strict. One deviation in clean room qualification can delay production for months.
Another major hurdle is timeline alignment. Companies often underestimate how long each step of reshoring takes because everything is tied to regulatory approval. You can't commission equipment until construction is complete. You can't validate processes until equipment is qualified. And you can't initiate production until the QMS is fully implemented and the site is inspection ready. If those timelines aren't integrated from the start, the project spirals.
That's where our integrated teams make a difference. Like we've had projects where we built the QMS, aligned the regulatory plan, supported the engineering firm, validated the clean rooms, prepared the submission, and trained the workforce, all in parallel. When you operate with cross functional coordination, the speed you can achieve is incredible. That's how some of our clients hit FDA approval in under a year.
Let's talk about workforce for a moment, because this is where many companies stumble. When you reshore manufacturing, you're suddenly in the position of hiring or retraining an entire GMP workforce operators, quality technicians, cleaning staff, engineers, validation specialists, supervisors. The list is long. Companies assume they can hire quickly and train later, but that's not realistic in a regulated environment.
Exactly. It's not enough to hire talent. You need people who understand aseptic behavior, GDP, FDA expectations, and quality first culture. Emma's contingent labor model solves that gap. Instead of companies spending months recruiting, onboarding, and hoping the team understands compliance, we deploy trained QARA validation professionals who can hit the ground running.
And these aren't just temporary bodies. They're people who understand exactly what regulators will expect on day one. For example, we've placed full QA teams during reshoring transitions who then trained incoming permanent staff. That's how you build sustainability.
Another critical area is supplier quality. Companies often assume that reshoring means starting with a clean slate, but in reality, you still need raw materials, components, and equipment, most of which are still global. When you bring production home, your entire supplier network must be reevaluated. Some vendors need new quality agreements, some need requalification, some need to be replaced.
One of the first things we do is a supplier quality audit and vendor rationalization map. Which suppliers can meet domestic production needs? Which ones pose compliance risks? Which ones require additional oversight? That blueprint becomes the foundation for a resilient supply chain.
What's interesting is that companies often discover their original vendor list was much bigger than necessary. Rationalizing vendors not only strengthens compliance, it reduces cost. And when you combine that with domestic control, the long term savings can be substantial.
Let's not forget the regulatory submissions tied to reshoring. If you change manufacturing sites for NDA, ANDA, 510K, PMA, BLA, or even de novo products, those changes must be communicated to FDA. That could mean supplements, amendments, comparability protocols. Every product category has specific requirements. The mistake companies make is assuming FDA views reshoring as just a site move. It's not, it's a full regulatory event.
That's why the regulatory strategy has to be built early. When Emma leads a reshoring effort, we align the regulatory team with engineering and quality before any concrete is poured. You can't build a facility and then ask if it meets FDA expectations. You have to design with compliance in mind.
And that's the theme emerging here. Reshoring isn't just a manufacturing decision, it's a strategic, regulatory, and operational transformation. If you approach it as a simple relocation, it will fail. If you treat it as an opportunity to modernize, strengthen compliance, and build resilience, it becomes a major competitive advantage.
Before we go any deeper, it's worth calling out something we see every day. No two reshoring projects look the same. Some companies are driven by quality issues, others by supply chain instability, others by cost volatility, and many by increasing regulatory pressure. But across all of them, one pattern is consistent. Organizations almost always underestimate how complex it is to move regulated manufacturing and how critical it is to align engineering, quality, and regulatory strategy from day one. When those pieces aren't synchronized, delays pile up fast.
Reshoring isn't just about changing where a product is made, it's about rebuilding control. Many companies come in thinking they just need a new facility or new equipment, but once we start mapping the transition, the real gaps become visible. Fragmented documentation, outdated validation packages, incomplete training records, supplier inconsistencies, or quality systems that can't withstand FDA scrutiny. Reshoring forces those weaknesses to the surface. That's why having a structured, compliance-driven plan is so important.
One of the biggest advantages of reshoring is clarity. When operations are domestic, communication is tighter, oversight is easier, and quality expectations are clearer. You're not navigating time zone gaps or cultural differences in compliance. You're working directly with teams who understand 21 CFR requirements, ISO standards, and FDA expectations. And that alone reduces risk. A lot of companies don't realize how much regulatory ambiguity they're dealing with until they move those operations closer to home.
Another core benefit is speed. When your engineering team, your quality team, and your regulatory team are all operating within the same framework and often in the same geography, decisions happen faster. Validation can be executed with less back and forth. Documentation can be corrected in real time, and FDA questions can be addressed proactively instead of reactively. Reshoring gives companies the chance to modernize, not because they have to, but because it becomes the most efficient path forward.
And then there's supply chain reliability. The last few years showed everyone how fragile global networks really are. Single supplier dependencies, geopolitical tension, long shipping lanes, material shortages, all of those risks compound when you're manufacturing overseas. Bringing production home strengthens the entire supply chain from raw materials to final distribution. Yet companies suddenly gain direct visibility into suppliers, incoming QC, materials testing, and logistics. And that visibility becomes part of regulatory confidence because regulators can see that you're not just compliant, you're in control.
We're also seeing companies use reshoring as a chance to adopt new technologies. Modern GMP facilities being built today look nothing like those built 15 or 20 years ago. Automation, electronic QMS platforms, continuous manufacturing, enhanced environmental controls. Reshoring gives companies the opportunity to embed innovation into their operations instead of retrofitting outdated systems. When you build new, you build right, leaner, more compliant, and more future-ready.
Another major factor is workforce. Companies underestimate how transformative it is to have a domestic team trained directly in FDA expectations. Whether it's aseptic technique, GDP, validation, or deviation handling, a US based workforce tends to operate with a higher baseline of regulatory fluency. And Emma's contingent labor model helps companies scale that workforce quickly. From validation engineers to QA specialists to regulatory professionals. When the right people are in place, compliance becomes a culture, not an obligation.
This ties into something else: sustainability and long-term resilience. Reshoring reduces dependence on unstable global systems and gives companies the ability to maintain business continuity even during disruptions. A localized, well-designed manufacturing ecosystem is more predictable, more transparent, and more aligned with federal expectations around quality and risk management. And with the FDA increasing focus on supply chain oversight, companies that reshore are positioning themselves ahead of future regulation, not scrambling to catch up.
The more the industry moves toward advanced therapies, sterile products, and personalized medicine, the more critical this control becomes. You can't rely on unpredictable offshore systems when manufacturing precision therapies. Regulators won't accept it, patients can't afford the risk, and companies can't scale reliably on unstable infrastructure.
And here's the part companies don't always realize at first. Reshoring isn't just a compliance decision. It becomes a strategic advantage. Faster inspections, stronger supplier control, quicker turnaround times, fewer deviations, better communication, and greater confidence from investors and partners. When everything is aligned, engineering, quality, regulatory, workforce, and operations, companies gain a level of operational clarity that's almost impossible to achieve when production is scattered across global networks.
As we continue this discussion, we're going to dig into the deeper strategic advantages reshoring unlocks. Everything from improved intellectual property protection to smoother FDA interactions to long term cost predictability to how US based operations enhance patient access and trust.
One thing we should dig into is the misconception that reshoring is simply moving a manufacturing site. It's really an organizational transformation. Companies often enter the process thinking the biggest lift will be capital investment or facility build-out. But in reality, the heaviest lift is harmonizing systems, bringing quality, regulatory, and operations into one cohesive framework that meets FDA standards without gaps. That's where many projects run into trouble, because if documentation isn't aligned, if validation packages don't match current requirements, or if the QMS hasn't been modernized, the move can stall fast.
That's why the integration piece is so critical. Emma approaches reshoring as an ecosystem project. Engineering can't work in its own silo, quality can't operate separately, and regulatory can't be an afterthought. Everything has to move together, and that's what makes the difference between a smooth transition and a costly delay. When companies try doing pieces independently, like hiring a construction firm for the facility, a consultant for validation, and someone else for regulatory submissions, and it becomes chaotic. But when those functions work under a unified strategy, things fall into place more efficiently.
Another area companies underestimate is documentation remediation. When you bring production back to the US, every single piece of documentation, procedures, batch records, validation protocols, specifications, forms, must match FDA expectations. Even small gaps can turn into major compliance risks. And many organizations don't realize how outdated or inconsistent their documentation has become until they begin preparing it for US regulators. Reshoring exposes those gaps, but it also creates the perfect opportunity to clean everything up and rebuild a stronger, fully aligned documentation ecosystem.
Technology transfer is another major challenge that's often overlooked. It's not just sending a recipe from one location to another, it's deeply technical work. Equipment comparability, process mapping, CQV alignment, raw material qualification, software validation, and ensuring analytical methods transfer cleanly. If even one element is off, say a slightly different environmental condition or equipment calibration, the entire production run can fail. When Emma leads tech transfer, every step is tied to regulatory expectations, making sure nothing slips through the cracks.
And then there's facility readiness. Modern GMP facilities require precise environmental standards, from cleanroom classifications to pressure differentials to HEPA filtration integrity. Whether a company is modifying an existing space or building something new, every choice has regulatory implications. That's why Emma's engineering and CQV support is so important. We're thinking not just about operational efficiency, but about what an FDA investigator will expect to see the moment they walk through the door. The goal is always the same: build it once, build it correctly, build it to last.
Contingent labor is also a major value driver. Reshoring compresses timelines. Companies are trying to stand up a new facility, implement a QMS, execute validation, prepare regulatory submissions, and hire staff, all while maintaining existing operations. No one has enough internal people to do all of that at once. With Emma's scalable staffing support, QA, RA, validation, engineering, manufacturing techs, documentation specialists, companies can accelerate timelines without compromising compliance. And because these professionals already understand FDA and ISO expectations, the learning curve is minimal.
Something else reshoring offers is increased intellectual property protection. When manufacturing is offshore, especially in locations with weaker IP frameworks, companies face real risk. Process knowledge, proprietary assays, and formulation details can be exposed. Reshoring brings that knowledge back under stronger legal and operational control. It's not talked about enough, but for biologics, combination products, and advanced therapies, IP protection is a major strategic advantage.
Another benefit is alignment with U.S. policy trends. The federal government has ramped up support for domestic production through grants, tax credits, and procurement incentives, especially for essential medicines, sterile injectables, biologics, diagnostics, and critical medical devices. Companies that reshore now are positioning themselves at the forefront of those opportunities. They're not waiting for regulatory pressure to mount, they're getting ahead of it.
Let's also talk about quality culture. When operations move home, companies gain more direct influence over training, deviation management, CAPA effectiveness, and continuous improvement. Offshore operations can meet requirements, but domestic operations tend to operate with a deeper understanding of FDA's interpretation of those requirements. That nuance matters, especially when it comes to investigations, batch release decisions, and readiness for pre-approval inspections.
And with reshoring, transparency skyrockets. Leaders can walk the floor, observe processes firsthand, meet directly with quality and engineering teams, and course correct in real time. Problems get solved faster, trends get spotted earlier, quality becomes visible instead of theoretical. And when FDA inspectors arrive, that transparency becomes one of the strongest indicators of control.
As we move forward in this conversation, we'll explore how reshoring strengthens regulatory confidence, reduces compliance risk, and positions companies for long-term, stable growth, not just operationally, but competitively.
As we wrap up today's conversation, one thing is absolutely clear: reshoring isn't a trend, It's a structural shift in how the life sciences industry operates. The companies that succeed in the next decade won't just be the ones with the most advanced products or the largest pipelines. They'll be the ones with resilient, compliant, transparent operations that regulators trust and that leadership can control end to end.
And that's really the heart of what reshoring delivers. Bringing production back to the U.S. isn't just about logistics or proximity. It's about rebuilding strength across an organization, tightening quality oversight, strengthening regulatory alignment, protecting IP, modernizing documentation, stabilizing supply chains, and creating a manufacturing environment where issues can be addressed immediately instead of managed from a distance.
The companies that choose to reshore today are shaping the new standard for operational excellence. They're reducing risk instead of reacting to it. They are building facilities designed for advanced therapies, not retrofitting outdated spaces. They're investing in internal teams who understand the science, the quality requirements, and the compliance expectations all at once. And they're creating a future where regulatory inspections aren't feared. They're welcomed because the systems are strong, the documentation is aligned, and the operation is in true control.
Reshoring also puts companies in a position to scale. When your facility, your QMS, your tech transfer processes, and your workforce all live under a harmonized US-aligned framework, you gain something most organizations don't have: the ability to grow without reworking everything from scratch. That's where the real long-term value lies.
And that's exactly what Emma International is built to support. Whether you're moving a single product line or your entire manufacturing footprint, we bring together quality, regulatory, engineering, validation, documentation, and staffing all in one integrated model. It's the easiest way to avoid fragmentation, eliminate compliance gaps, and get your operation online as quickly and cleanly as possible.
If you're considering reshoring or even just exploring what it would take, our team is here to guide you every step of the way. You can always reach us at info@emmainternational.com or visit emmainternational.com to learn more about our reshoring services and how we help organizations build strong, future-ready manufacturing operations.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Deep Dive. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and Spotify so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay innovative.